Thank you very much indeed. My name is Nick Blunden. I am originally from London, which is convenient because it rhymes. But it's a pleasure to be here because I spend most of my time in New York, and it feels great to come back here and to be home, as it were. So thank you very much for having me. Mark was making up words. Dominic was using a strategy that I use in New York. Presenting with a French accent gives it a certain richness. Now, when I'm in New York, people say you're British. What you say, because you have a British accent, must make sense. It doesn't work so much here, which is a bit of a disadvantage. But I am going to talk to you about data. In fact, the data that underlines some of the stuff that we've been talking about. Mark talked about the importance of data. I think we all recognise the importance of data. So my job this morning is to share with you some of the data. I'm going to hit that one more time. There we go. To share some of the data that we put together as part of a survey we did for the IPA. And that survey was into how ready UK businesses are to serve connected customers. But for any of you who've had the misfortune of seeing me present before, you'll know that I always start my presentations with an apology. And today's apology is about this image, because looking out into the audience, I recognise that this image will mean nothing to probably 50% of you who were born after the last episode of the TV series Open All Hours was aired in 1985. And the reason for using that image is, one, because it has a nice connection to the survey that we did, which was called Open All Hours, but also because it creates a really interesting juxtaposition for me. Open All Hours was a BBC TV series that aired between 1973 and 1985, which talked about, or had as its central premise, a grocery store in southern Yorkshire. And it's interesting because, of course, that was the experience of retail that a lot of us had back then. Of course, it was, there were still supermarkets, there were still other opportunities, but our experiences of retail were shaped by experiences like shopping at Arkwright's store in South Yorkshire. That was only 30 years ago. Now our experiences of retail, our expectations are shaped not by this, but by Amazon and the like. And of course, in 1985, when the last episode of Open All Hours aired, Amazon was not even a twinkle in Jeff Bezos' eyes. Amazon didn't come around for another 10 years, so launched in 1995. So a huge change. So apologies about the image reference for those of you who don't recognise it, but it gave me an opportunity to be a little bit sentimental to start. But now let's talk about the data itself. So in September 2014, the Economist Intelligence Unit, which is the research part of the Economist Group, surveyed 176 UK business executives to try and understand how they are adjusting to the rise of the connected consumer or the connected customer. And let me just preface this by explaining to you how we define the connected customer. It's a relatively simplistic way that we defined it. We talked about those people who are economically active, who are using multiple digital devices to undertake relatively sophisticated online activities such as e-commerce. So it's a relatively broad categorization, but that's how we defined connected customers. And we went and asked a series of questions to these 176 UK business executives. And not surprisingly, to most of the people in this room, the first point that we found is the majority of UK business executives who we survey recognise that engaging with connected customers is a strategic priority. I should not think that that's particularly surprising for anybody in this room. And part of it is driven by the fact that the vast majority of the executives that we spoke to across a broad range of industries, unified by the fact that they were very high up in those businesses, C-suite generally, the vast majority of them recognise that the connected customer or connected consumer is an ever-growing part of their customer base. So very few of the executives we spoke to dismissed the idea that the connected consumer or connected customer is of growing importance. Well, you'll also notice from the survey data that in addition to that, 27% of our panel said that they strongly agreed that engaging with a connected customer was a strategic priority. Another 48%, so making just about 3/4 in total, agreed that it was a priority of some description. Now that's good because I think all of the things that we've heard about, that recognises that on the client side, the things that we talk about in media owner side and agency side are really resonating with our clients. What's interesting though is that having said that 75% of the executives we spoke to recognised the connected customer of a strategic priority, interesting therefore that relatively few of them, or at least in relative terms, have actually implemented a separate strategy that targets the connected customer. So the data tells us that when asked, about 29% of the executives that we spoke to said, we have a specific strategy for engaging with the connected customer. 23% said, well, we segment on that basis, but we don't necessarily have that strategy. The worrying thing for me, 40%, nearly 1 in 2, said, we have not, even though we recognize the importance of this, we have not got to a stage where we are developing strategies specifically for connected customers. And that, for me, is a worry. And we showed Dominic showed the list of European or UK companies that are in the top in terms of internet activity. Of course, as an economic driver for the UK, this is concerning to me. Now, what's interesting is 20% of people who we spoke to talked about a mobile-first strategy. And so we thought that was interesting because we were interested in a more general view about the connected customer, but we drove down into mobile specifically. And we found somewhat more reassuringly that a significant group of the people that we spoke to said, look, we may not have a connected customer strategy, but we certainly have some sort of mobile strategy. 29% of our survey panel said, we have been doing this for some time. We're 12 months into the implementation of a mobile-specific strategy. And another 40% of people said, look, this is on our agenda, so we're either in the process of putting forward a mobile-first strategy or we have implemented one recently. But this, again, is interesting for me because it doesn't surprise me that there is a big focus on mobile. And I think it's absolutely the right thing, given the growth that we're seeing as mobile as a connected device. The thing that slightly concerns me about this is that mobile is so important these days that to some degree it is the glue that brings together the whole of the connected experience. And if one thinks about mobile in a silo, one's missing, I think, the broader piece that is about how can mobile be used to implement or engage with your consumer across multiple platforms. So that was interesting. What came out, though, in the data about why there is potentially this disconnect between the number of executives who say that the connected customer is important and the number of businesses that are actually acting on that seems to be a lack of confidence in understanding about the habits of the connected customer. And again, we drilled down into that to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what's driving that. And what was interesting is executives said, look, I think we understand broadly the demographic profile of the connected customer. We have some sort of idea that these people exist. We can measure their existence and we can engage with them in certain ways. But if there's one thing that we're really concerned about, it's that we don't really understand their buying habits and their preferences. I think that comes back to this point about it's very easy to focus in on saying, well, let's have a mobile strategy, if you don't really understand the broader role that something like mobile plays in a completely connected experience. So some concerns that, again, when you think about it, only 12% of the 176 executives that we spoke to said that they were very confident that they understood the buying habits and preferences of their own connected customer. Really interesting and a little bit alarming, I think. We also talked to our executives not just about their understanding, but the things that concern them about or the things that they are worried about when it comes to the rise of the connected customer. And interesting for me, of all of the things that we talked about, what are the challenges you face in dealing with increasingly connected customers? The thing that came out top of the list was related to a nervousness about their brand and reputation. So when you ask them, not surprisingly, 23% or 1 in 4 talking about, well, in dealing with connected customers, it's difficult to attract the staff with the relevant skills to change our business, to be able to engage with those people. Our executives talked about their concerns about how do I make my business truly 24/7. But top of the list of concerns, really interesting, was exposing our brand and reputation to online comments and social media posts. Really, really interesting. Of all of the sort of strategic concerns you might have about the connected customer, to pull that one out, really, really interesting to me. And that's not because I think our executives were in denial about the way the world is going. Clearly, amongst this very educated and connected audience, there was a realization that social media is not a fad, it's not something that will come and go, that it's absolutely fundamental to the changing nature of their business. But I think, and that's represented, we also asked this question about how do you think the way that you'll communicate with your customers, your connected customers, over the next 3 years will change. What's interesting is there is an absolute recognition in this data that the shift over the next 3 years is only going in one direction when it comes to communication, and it's going to a more social participatory media environment. So again, a concern that are executives worried about how their brands play out from a reputation perspective in an increasingly social world, while simultaneously recognizing that this shift is one that is happening and is not going in any other direction. So that, I think, plays to something that we all in this room need to think very carefully about, is that there is still, and this came out again in the research, a real sense amongst our clients, amongst UK businesses, that they feel much more comfortable in a world that is dictated by broadcast, one-way media, right? And that's not surprising, because most of them will have grown up in a world where that was the dominant media model. So when we talked to them again about more, we drove more into the concerns that were highlighted in the research. What was interesting is that very few of them had much confidence in the ability of their organizations to engage in a real-time discussion with their customer base, recognizing that that's absolutely important, but also recognizing that they didn't feel confident that their organizations had the skills necessary to move from this world that is broadcast media into a participatory media world where the brand is meaningful and you're having real-time discussions. Now, when you read through some of this data, you might think, well, you know, there's a little bit of head in the sand type thinking here. But what is clear is that when we spoke to our panel of 176 business executives, there is a lot of money being invested into this area. And clearly those investments, when you ask about the investments in digital technology, are going into the places you would expect them to go. A lot of money being spent on investing in websites, a lot of money being spent investing in e-commerce platforms. Interesting to me, though, in relative terms, less investment around mobile technology, less investment around social media. And I'll come on to talk about this, and Dominic talked about this. The paid, owned, and earned element of any media strategy seems to be slightly underrepresented when people think about where they're making their investments, where UK businesses are making their investments. Also slightly concerning, I think, is this investment in staff training. If you think that how many organizations are going to be driven by being able to engage with their connected customers, the fact that more money is not spent on leveraging that change all the way through the organization is something of a concern. Now, the final thing from the research that I wanted to pull out is that underlying all of this, I think, and sitting at the heart of the new media model, is the ability to collect, utilize, analyze data. And we asked a very specific question about the data capabilities of UK businesses and the confidence that UK executives had in their organization's ability to collect and harness the power of data. And again, interesting, 7% of our executives, only 7%, were confident in the ability of their businesses to deal with the data that's being created as a result of the connected consumer. Slightly more reassuring, about 48%. Were reasonably confident. But nevertheless, about 1 in 2 saying, I don't really feel confident or I'm not at all confident about my organization's ability to deal with the data that's being generated in this increasingly participatory media world. So really interesting. And that was a summary of the data that we produced. And I just thought I'd leave you with a couple of my own observations, which are really very personal things and not related or personal interpretations of what we've just seen. When you boil all of those things down, you look at the research or the survey in its entirety, I think it paints an interesting picture. On the one hand, you can look at it and say, clearly UK businesses are struggling to adapt to this changing world. But I think it's also easy to look at it as a huge opportunity. And that opportunity is to help UK executives with a roadmap that enables them to harness the power of digital media to create a truly connected business. Because if increasingly you have connected customers, I don't think it's a huge leap of faith to say that you need a connected business. Now, it's one of those things that's very easy to say, and there's no one panacea for, you know, how do you help a client move from a world of traditional media to connected media? How do you move a client away from a reliance on paid media to owned and earned media? But I think something that we in this room have to address is that we need to work harder to demonstrate to our clients how this combination of paid, earned, and owned media with data at its heart isn't just about transforming communications. It's about transforming every aspect of the business value chain. That when you think about media in those terms, and increasingly digital media in those much broader terms, it's possible to see how it impacts on every part of the business. And as long as the conversation around it, the connected customer, is purely a marketing conversation, I think it is limited in its scope. It has to be a conversation about the whole business. And the final thing that I'll leave you with is I think it's very easy for people like me or certainly the agency people in this room to use the obvious examples about companies that have turned themselves into a connected business. We can all talk about Nike and say, isn't it wonderful that Nike has transitioned its media spending towards digital media? Isn't it wonderful that Nike's invented the fuel band that enables them to collect all of this data? We can also all talk very eloquently about companies like Red Bull. The problem is, for most UK business executives, while they recognise the power of those examples, they don't necessarily apply to the businesses that they run. And in that case, it's very easy to say, well, that's all very interesting, that it doesn't apply to me. And so I think we have a duty and a responsibility to continually celebrate those companies that aren't in those spaces that are also doing this stuff. And there are a lot of companies that have started on this journey to being much more connected businesses. So I wanted to leave you with a very short video that's an example of one of them. Now, it's a bit self-serving because it's a company that we at The Economist work with very closely. And the video I'm just about to show you is something that we're doing with this company, which is GE. But I think it is extraordinary that a company born out of Edison all those years ago, over 100 years old as a business, is revolutionizing the way it not only communicates with its customers, but its whole business end to end by embracing and putting media paid, owned and earned at its heart. So I'll leave you with this short video and hopefully it'll give you a sense that the stuff that I'm talking about is not just the realm of the Nikes and Red Bulls of this world, but it's something that's applicable to everybody. So if we could run the video.
Information is the currency of a global world, but not just any information, the right information. GE needed to cut through the information clutter and connect with business decision makers. The Economist Group created Look Ahead, an alternative to traditional advertising that showcases innovations that impact the way we build, power, move, and cure the world around us.
It's not enough to say you know who GE is, you have to know what GE does.
With ever-increasing sources for news, information, and insight, Look Ahead briefs business decision-makers on the innovations shaping their world.
The whole idea, I think, is absolutely groundbreaking in the way that it uses different media, paid, owned and earned media to create a holistic program that reaches global decision-makers.
We're looking at content that has a daily cadence that is produced by a team that's scattered around the globe and really moves at the speed of news much more than sort of traditional above-the-line advertising.
Look Ahead comes to life in key markets around the world by drawing on The Economist's thought-provoking global events, industry deep dives, live discussions, and debates. It also draws on content from across The Economist website, utilizing slideshows, animations, live polls, infographics, articles, videos, and social media, aligning the Look Ahead content with relevant stories from The Economist.
We're very metrics focused. We're looking at how engaged the audience is and have we moved the needle.
Since it launched, the Look Ahead program has reached, engaged, amplified, informed, and inspired. GE Look Ahead, just one of the many groundbreaking solutions from The Economist Group.
So that's everything from me. Thank you very much.